Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Saturday night slate for Week 9 of the 2024 season for college football DFS. We have got a 7-game night slate, and I've kind of been hyping up the night slates in weeks past for liking the game selection more than the main slates. This one is not the best night slate I've ever seen, but I do think there are a ton of options for building DFS lineups. I think that the way DraftKings structure the salaries really do give you the freedom to do a lot with your lineups here in this night slate. So we're going to break down all 7 games, tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as tell you who needs to be in or out of your DFS lineups on DraftKings as well as FanDuel for this Saturday night slate. Now, as a reminder, make sure you're subscribed with us for the rest of the season, that we can be with us for the rest of all of our college football content all the way till the end of November, as well as our upcoming college basketball content, as well as our weekly golf and NFL content as well. Now, I will have to say here that, we've been pretty much pumping out content for almost every single college football slate, which is a lot because, we got the midweek games now. We got Conference USA playing on Tuesdays. We're about to have the MAC playing on Tuesdays. But, I got to be honest, don't expect every single slate to be covered. I will do my absolute best to get the Saturday main and night slates out, but a lot of these midweek slates, I'm about to start my busy season. I'm currently coaching the girls flag football team at the high school that I teach and work at, and then my high school basketball season that I coach is about to start soon as well. So we're about to enter my busy season, so I'm just not going to have as much time to research and record for all of these different college football slates. So just a heads up, if you are looking for a slate and it's not there, it's probably just because I had a lot going on, and I do apologize, but it's kind of hard to balance teaching, coaching, having a 1-year-old baby at home, and trying to start a successful podcast like this. So just know that if you're subscribed, the content will come out when it comes out. So that's the best way to know when it does come out. I will be doing my core plays on the Patreon for every single DFS slate. So if you're interested in knowing who actually makes the lineups, you can get on the Patreon and check that out. Whether I do a video or not, you will see the core plays on the Patreon. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. We're recording this pretty darn late on a Friday night, so this is going to be a little abbreviated, but we're still going to tell you everything you need to know. But we got 7 games to get to, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, first game up is going to be a rivalry game that meant a lot when I was a little kid. Doesn't exactly feel like it means a whole lot this year, though. We got FSU heading to Coral Gables to take on Miami. Miami is currently 21-point favorites with a game total of 54.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 38-17 in favor of the Hurricanes. This does make Miami the highest implied scoring team on the slate. Remember, I do not do decimal points for my implied totals because they don't actually exist on the field. So if Miami's the highest implied team on the slate, it makes sense to go ahead and get you some Miami guys, right? Well, let's talk about FSU first. So FSU is an offense that I'm just not really all that interested in. It's likely to be Brock Glenn starting at quarterback. They did bench him for a few series to give Luke Kromenhoek a shot against Duke, but he didn't look all that great. They went back to Brock Glenn before the game was over. It'll be Brock Glenn. I have no faith in him to have a lot of success. The one guy I do have interest in for Florida State is Lawrence Toafili. We have been kind of hyping him up since he has been the workhorse back for this team since Roy Dale Williams has been injured. But the production has just been kind of he's had 4 games in double digits, but no games above 17 fantasy points. I don't think at 4,500 he's a bad value, especially considering more and more of his backfield mates continue to get hurt. I think that makes him a kind of appealing play at 4,500. FSU receivers, I'm just not interested. On the Miami side, you got to be interested, right? Highest team total on the slate. Well, they have Cam Ward at quarterback, and he has just been lights out all season long. Over 32 fantasy points in every single game, over 300 yards passing in every single game. If I sound like a broken record saying that, it's because he continues to do it every single week, and he continues to be on the DraftKings slate every single week. So Cam Ward just has a ton of upside, $10,500. I do think that that's an expensive price tag, but I do think it's very reasonable. I think it's quite likely that he gets you the 30 to 31 DraftKings points that you need in order for him to hit value at that salary. And I also got to say, there's enough cheap running back and receiver options on this slate that you can pay up for Cam Ward, and you can find plenty of ways to build out the rest of your lineup. For running back at Miami, Mark Fletcher continues to steal more and more of the work for Damian Martinez. Last game, Fletcher had a season-high 13 carries. Martinez only had 12. And look, as successful this passing offense is, both these running back plays, when they're getting 50-50 workloads, they're just touchdown-dependent guys, and I think there's just better, more solid other running back plays out there, and I'm not going to touch it for this Miami team. At the wide receiver position, Xavier Restrepo continues to be their most targeted receiver, very productive against Louisville, 9 targets, caught 7 of them for 101 yards, 26.1 DraftKings points on that day. Isaiah Horton continues to kind of be a sneaky producer, had 7 targets in that Louisville game. He's priced as the number 2 receiver on DraftKings now. He is now past Jacoby George, who was targeted 4 times in that Louisville game. And then Sam Brown was only targeted 4 times against Louisville as well, but he did catch 2 big ones and turned it into 24.5 DraftKings points. So with Miami, you know it's going to be some combination of those 4 receivers and Elijah Arroyo at tight end. Really, the one that you can have the most confidence in is Restrepo. But other than that, I really think that you're probably just flipping a coin, whether it's going to be Horton, George, or Sam Brown Jr. So if you're playing a lot of lineups, you can mix in a lot of different Cam Ward stacks. But if you're really just focusing in on one Cam Ward stack, I think Restrepo has to be your stacking partner. And again, even though they're both pretty darn expensive, I do think there's enough cheap options on this slate that you can still build a lineup with that expensive stack. Game number 2 is going to be LSU heading to College Station to take on the Texas A&M Aggies. Texas A&M is currently 1-point favorite in this game with a game total of 54.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 28-27 in favor of the Aggies. This is an interesting spot for me because I personally did not see the game total being this high. I thought it was going to be in the high 40s, but it's in the mid 50s. Garrett Nussmeier is LSU's quarterback. He's been up and down all season long. He really, with the fact that he doesn't give you any rushing upside, he really needs multiple touchdowns in order to have a good game. And against Arkansas, Caden Durham scored all the touchdowns via running. So he didn't get any passing touchdowns, and it ended up being a bad game in which he was actually fairly effective as a passer. So I really have a hard time selling myself on Nussmeier at his expensive price tag. Going up against this Texas A&M defense where we have seen them be pretty stout all season long, it's definitely one of the toughest defenses that LSU has faced so far, if not the toughest that they've faced so far. So I just don't really have a whole lot of interest in Nussmeier. At the running back position, Caden Durham is listed as probable for this game. He carried the ball 21 times against Arkansas, 3 touchdowns in that game, and I really feel like if he didn't vulture the touchdowns, we'd probably be feeling pretty differently. I think a lot of people are going to chase the points that he had in that game. Now, he is an explosive player, like makes big plays all the time, so I don't think he's the worst play in the world, but I think that the kind of fluky 3 touchdown game is going to draw a lot more ownership on him than there should be. At the wide receiver spot, Chris Hilton Jr. is finally listed as probable for this game. He hasn't played all season. He was supposed to start in the offseason. CJ Daniels, Liberty transfer, list is questionable for this game. He's supposed to be a starter as well. So really, if those 2 guys are active, I feel like I've said this about LSU multiple times before, if those 2 guys are active, that's just going to kind of eat into the slices of the pie that Kyron Lacey and Aaron Anderson and Mason Taylor have been getting. And like I said, I don't think it's going to be a super prolific passing game for LSU anyway. So especially if Daniels and Hilton are active, I'm probably all the way out on the LSU receiving core. I do think that there is a little bit of an argument to be made if they end up being out that you could play Anderson or Taylor at a pretty cheap price tag. On the Texas A&M side, like this is a team projected to score 28 points, and they are not priced like it on DraftKings. So Connor Weigman has been back to being the starter since he has recovered from his injury. He has not had any big games so far this season. His best game was 16.9 DraftKings points, and that was against an FCS opponent. But he was great 2 years ago and last year when he got to be the starter before he got injured. So I know that the big games are in there. I know that the chances are in there. LSU is probably going to be the worst defense that they have played recently, at least in SEC play. So I do think that this is a pretty good spot for Connor Weigman at only 5,800. Like I said, they're still implied to score 28 points. That's 4 touchdowns. So if you think that Weigman only accounts for 0 or 1 of those touchdowns, then the back's got to account for the other ones, right? And Le'Veon Moss is a pretty solid option. He continues to be this team's workhorse. 60 total DraftKings points in the last 2 games, a 40 and a 20 piece. $5,500 is a very reasonable price tag for him. I have a lot of interest in Le'Veon Moss. I think that if I'm not playing Weigman in my lineups, I'm going to be trying to get Le'Veon Moss in there. And at the wide receiver spot, Weigman has some super cheap stacking options. Noah Thomas is the speedster that is also quite large. He's just a big play waiting to happen. He's been their most productive wide receiver thus far this season. But don't sleep on Jabari Barber. He's a transfer from Troy. I'm like 99% sure it's Troy. Had 6 catches against Mississippi State. Really seeming to be more and more of a factor in this Texas A&M offense. He's only $3,500. I think that those are the 2 guys that I would look to stick with in terms of a stacking partner with Weigman. I don't think I would be looking to play them if I wasn't playing Weigman, though. I don't think they make for great one-off plays. Game number 3 is going to be the battle for Michigan. I feel like there should be a better nickname for this game. Maybe there is a better nickname for this game. We got Michigan State heading on over across the state to Ann Arbor to take on Michigan. Michigan is 4.5-point favorites in this game with a game total of 39.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30, or the total is 39.5. The implied total is about 22-18 in favor of Michigan. I was reading the wrong line on my notes there. Michigan State, it's really hard for me to sell myself on a team that is going up against this Michigan defense. Aiden Childs is super cheap. So if you think that Michigan jumps out to an early lead and all Michigan State's going to do is throw, that's a lot of passing volume and a little bit of rushing upside for a very cheap price tag. I don't think he's the worst play on the slate. I think he's a very reasonable, low-priced, low-owned quarterback play. At the running back spot, continues to be a committee for Michigan State. Katron Lynch-Adams continues to be the leader. I'm not interested going up against this Michigan defense. Montori Foster has been the most productive Michigan State receiver thus far this season, but Nick Marsh is worth mentioning here because he has had two random big games, one against Maryland where he had 36 DraftKings points, one against Iowa where he had 22 DraftKings points. If he's going to have these random big games, I know it's not necessarily likely that he's going to have one against Michigan, but only $3,500 and a ton of upside. I think he's very reasonable to put into your lineups. On the Michigan side, they are going back to Davis Warren at quarterback. I don't understand why. I'm so frustrated with this Michigan season. I feel like from the start they should have just went with Alex Orji, but they should have been using him in creative and innovative ways as a runner, not just a handoff machine to Khalil Mullings or a plow head first into the line like a fullback type runner. I continue to be disappointed with how this offense is run, but they're going back to Davis Warren. I have zero interest in playing him. At the running back spot, it is still a committee between Mullings and Edwards, but the usage is there for Mullings. He had 19 carries last week against Illinois, 16.5 DraftKings points in that game. Michigan State gives up 152 rushing yards per game, which ranks slightly above average. So this isn't the best matchup on paper, but hey, if they're going back to Davis Warren, to me, you're not going to let Davis Warren throw it 50 times a game. So I think Mullings and Edwards both got to be in play for you here on this slate. At the wide receiver spot, like I said, Michigan's passing offense is bad, but Colston Loveland, their tight end, is by far their best weapon in the passing game, and he's been back for the last 3 games, 15 DraftKings points in the last 2. At his salary of $4,400, to me, that's quite reasonable. If he finds the end zone, he's going to instantly pay off that salary. I do not mind getting to Colston Loveland as a one-off passing option here in this Michigan offense. All right, let's take a quick breather, and then we're going to talk about the last 4 games. Quick reminder that if you do want more information from me, there are places you can get it. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I do my best to tweet out like any show updates on Twitter, as well as, kind of if there's any opinions that change, because I do tend to record these a long time before the slate. Not this episode per se, but, if there's ever any opinions that change or something, I do try to get it out there. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer if you reach out to me on Twitter. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a bunch of very smart, very good people who play DFS for a bunch of different sports. College football is one of them. And there have been a lot of really good, productive discussions, talking strategy, talking plays in the college football chat. And then really it's just a blast to be in that community and sweat it out together. So if you're looking for people to talk DFS with, Fantasy Corner Discord is the place to go. And as mentioned earlier, I do write an article for my Patreon every single college football DFS slate with my core plays. Now, I will not just guarantee that playing these guys is going to win you thousands of dollars. That's not how life works. If anybody promises that, they're lying. But I will promise that you can get some well-researched, well-thought-out takes from somebody who understands DFS and understands college football and can help you get better at your process in that regard. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on with game number 4. Penn State heading to Camp Randall to take on Wisconsin. Penn State 6.5-point favorites with a game total of 47.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 27-20 in favor of the Nittany Lions. So Penn State, Drew Auer, I've been kind of like hating on playing him all season long, but the price tag is much better now than it was at the start of the season. It's a season low $7,400. That means he needs to get you about 22 fantasy points to hit value, and he can do that. And this is a Wisconsin team that, you can really, I think, have either way defensively. I think they're not a great run defense and not a great pass defense. So I don't think Auer's the worst play in the world. He's not going to be my favorite quarterback play, though. At the running back position, still split between Singleton and Allen. Against USC, they really fell behind in that game and had to utilize more of a passing attack, but Katron Allen did get more of the work in the run game. Singleton did see more of the work in the receiving game. And, we talked about these two all season long. I think if you play enough lineups, you should be playing a little bit of both, because on the one chance that, one guy does get 80% of the carries one week, then you're going to have a massive outcome. Singleton is more of a big play guy. Allen is more of a grinder. I think they complement each other well, and I do think that, like I said, if you're playing enough DFS lineups, get yourself a little bit of exposure to both of them. At the wide receiver spot, Tyler Warren is significantly priced up after his insane 20-target, 17-catch game against USC. That's not happening again, but he is absolutely regularly involved in this offense. They use him as a wildcat quarterback, as well as their most targeted receiver. So I like the idea of playing Tyler Warren. I don't like the idea of playing Tyler Warren at that salary of $6,700. I think that's way too expensive. On the Wisconsin side, they have still been going with Braden Lockett at quarterback, and it hasn't really changed their offensive philosophy. They've still been throwing it a decent bit, especially when playing from behind. $4,800 though, going up against the Penn State defense, just not for me. I feel the same way at running back. Like, Tawee Walker has been outstanding since he's been the lead back, taking over for Ches Malusi. 27, 42, and 18 DraftKings points in those 3 games he's had as a starter. Seen at least 19 touches in all 3 of those games. He's been great, but the Penn State run defense is pretty stout. So I think that Walker, if you're looking to get to him, is just a volume-based play, not a matchup-based play. I do think that if you weren't playing one of the nation's best run defenses, I do think that $6,100 is an absolute bargain. At the wide receiver spot, Will Pauling has been their wide receiver 1 for the last 2 seasons. 8 targets, caught 5 of them for 51 yards against Northwestern. Not a bad look, in my opinion. He really just needs to score some touchdowns to start hitting value. $4,000 is a super reasonable price tag, though. They're going to be playing from behind. They're going to have passing volume. I don't mind Pauling. Bryson Green, their wide receiver 2, is a game-time decision for this game. If he is out, Trek Hekahuna has been a big-time producer, when Wisconsin's other receivers like Pauling and Green have been out. He's kind of boomer bust, though. But if you're looking for a boom at $3,600, I don't mind it. And also Vinny Anthony, for whatever reason, seems to catch a deep pass every single game. I don't know how he does it. But if you're looking to kind of try to go back to that well, $3,200 is very cheap to do that with. Next up, we've got Auburn taking on Kentucky. And this is the ugliest game of the slate. Kentucky's a 1.5-point favorite. Game total 43.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 23-21 in favor of Kentucky. And do I have to talk about Peyton Thorne again? I guess I do. He is what he is. Like, he is a guy who is going to get a decent amount of pass volume. He is pretty aggressive with how he targets receivers. A lot of times he targets the wide open safety. And he has very minimal rushing upside. He's going to get positive rushing yardage, but doesn't often score, doesn't often give you big yardage totals. $6,500 in a bad game environment against a good Kentucky defense is a pass from me. At the running back spot for Auburn, I do like Jarquez Hunter, and I do like that he's getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Really, I think that his usage is just too good to only be $4,900. Yes, he has been quite inefficient this season. Yes, he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns this season. But $4,900 for a true bell cow running back for a team that they're not going to let Peyton Thorne throw it 50 times a game, or at least I wouldn't if I were their coach. I think it's quite reasonable to play for Jarquez Hunter, and he's absolutely going to make my player pool. At the wide receiver spot, I'm going to continue to bang the drum for Keandre Lambert-Smith. Big play wide receivers who are often their team's most targeted wide receiver tend to be a good combination. In Missouri, he just never got going, only 2 catches for 16 yards. But I think that he's the one other guy in this Auburn offense who could absolutely smash his price tag. Cam Coleman. Excuse me. Here's Missouri. Only targeted twice, but you turn one of them into a 47-yard touchdown. You're going to need something like that again from him if you want him to hit value. Sorry, y'all. I am really tired. It's quite late here Friday night. It's been a quite long week for me, so sorry for the yawn there. On the Kentucky side, Brock Vandegrift is the starter. He's only $4,700, but even then, I'm just not all that interested. Like, I think it's quite likely that he gets in between 2x and 3x value for his salary, something between like 10 and 14 DraftKings points, but I don't really see it as quite likely that he goes over that. The only game that he's gone over that this season was against Southern Miss, which is a very bad team. So I just don't really see that happening against Auburn. At running back, Kentucky is going to be without their top 2 backs, Chip Trainum and Demisumo Karnby. That appears to leave Jamarian Wilcox in line to start the game. We don't have a sample size of him as a starter. What we do know is that he's carried the ball 32 times this season, has not scored. He is your punt running back play on the slate. $3,300 for a guy who's going to start for an offense that isn't going to throw the ball 50 times a game. So don't necessarily mind him as a punt running back play. At the wide receiver spot, Dane Key and Barryon Brown are this team's two wide receiving options. It was Brown who had a long touchdown against Florida and turned that into 20 fantasy points. And it was Dane Key who continues to see more consistent volume on a week-in, week-out basis. I think you can play either of them as one-off plays. Brown's a big play waiting to happen. Key is seeing a ton of volume. Even with Brock Vandegrift not really being super playable, I think that both those guys are playable. Next up, we've got probably the most interesting game of the slate to me. Kansas taking on Kansas State. Game total of 55.5 points. It is the slate's highest total out of all 7 games. Kansas State is 10-point favorites with a game. We just said that the game total is 55.5. My bad. The implied total is about 33-23 in favor of Kansas State. Sorry, y'all, making some late night mistakes here. On the Kansas side, I do think Jalen Daniels is a solid play here on this slate. He really seemed to find it against Houston last week. 3 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, looking more like the Jalen Daniels that we saw last year and 2 years ago. And Kansas State is a team that is going to be a pass funnel. They're going to try to make you beat them by passing the ball. They give up only 91 rushing yards per game. They're really stout run defense. So I do think that this is a spot where Jalen Daniels is going to see increased number of dropbacks here in this game. And that's going to be more opportunities for him to put up fancy points. And at a salary of $6,000, there's a chance that he could absolutely smash that salary. To me, if you're asking me, hey, Mike, what one quarterback has the chance to absolutely break the slate, it would be Jalen Daniels because of his price tag at $6,000 and what he can give you in both the run and the pass game. Like I said, Kansas State's a really solid run defense, so I don't necessarily I'm not in love with Devin Neal here in this spot, even though I do think he is significantly underpriced. What's interesting, though, is that, Daryl Highshaw usually splits carries with Devin Neal. He is very questionable for this game, suffered an injury early in the game against Houston. If Highshaw does not play, I think Neal is a really solid play because we usually see a carry split between them two. Highshaw usually, he one or two times a season he has a big game and totally vultures Devin Neal. But Neal without Highshaw, I think is very appealing at 6,500. Even though the matchup is not the best, he's going to see a ton of volume. I feel like there was another running back we said that about early on the episode where we said he's a volume play, not a matchup play. It was Tawee Walker, who's right next in price to Devin Neal. So very similar type plays in a similar price range there. At the receiver spot for Kansas, here's the good news. They only throw to 3 guys. Here's the bad news. You never know which one of them is going to have the big game. More often than not, it's Luke Graham. He has been their most productive receiver over the course of the season, but he has seen a significant downturn in production in their last 2 games against Arizona State and Houston. Lawrence Arnold was their best receiver last year against Houston. Decent game, 4 receptions, 80 yards, did not find the end zone, though. Quincy Skinner is the guy who has actually been the most productive receiver each of the last 2 weeks, though. Against Arizona State, caught 6 passes for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns, 34 DraftKings points. Against Houston, he scored another touchdown, 2 catches, 59 yards and a touchdown. So to me, Skinner is the guy I want to get to, at least based off of recency bias. Over the course of the whole season, though, Graham definitely has been the guy, but don't discount Arnold either. Like I said earlier, I don't remember what other team I was talking about with these receivers. If you're playing enough lineups, you can play stacks with all 3 of them. I think Skinner is the one on paper that makes the most sense when you take into account recent usage and price tag. On the Kansas State side, Avery Johnson is another quarterback who can absolutely break a slate because he generally runs the ball a ton. For whatever reason, against West Virginia, he really didn't run. Like, it was really weird. He got to 24 fantasy points all by his arm, and it would have been more if he got the 300-yard bonus. He was 2 yards away from it. So if Avery Johnson's going to start beating people from the pocket, that makes him really appealing as a play. Kansas State is a team that loves to run the football. They will run it with Avery Johnson. Kansas gives up 161 rushing yards a game, so I do think this bodes well into Avery Johnson using his legs. I don't necessarily like the fact that he had his last game with no rushing attempts, but hey, if he's able to have a successful fantasy game with no rushing attempts, that just should only mean good things for when he actually does have successful rushing days. At the running back spot, like I said, this is a great rushing matchup. DJ Giddens is the workhorse running back. Against West Virginia, he made it his 3rd straight game of over 24 DraftKings points. He seems to always have a long screen pass in a game as well. 3 straight games of at least 1 catch over 20 yards. I just think he's a really solid play. I think he is the top running back play on the slate. If you were asking me to objectively rank the running back plays, I would probably have Giddens 1 and Mullings 2. So I definitely really do like DJ Giddens here in the spot. At wide receiver, because of their normally decreased passing volume, Kansas State doesn't have a whole lot of productive receivers. Last week against West Virginia, though, they did. Jace Brown has been their number one wide receiver all season long. Only had 2 for 22 against West Virginia. We've seen him have big games. We've seen him be this team's target leader throughout the season. Keegan Johnson is another receiver who is regularly involved in the game plan. $3,500. I don't think that's a bad option. And then Will Ancio is starting to get more and more usage, just kind of random like tight end catches though. But the problem is with playing a guy like Ancio, and Garrett Oakley is this way as well. They're both tight ends, and they're supposed to get their starting tight end Braden Lofton back this week. So I don't necessarily feel comfortable going with Ancio or Oakley, knowing that Lofton is going to be back in the lineup. Next up, last game of the night, we've got SMU heading to Durham to take on the Duke Blue Devils. Somehow this is an ACC conference matchup, even though it doesn't feel like it at all. This feels like a non-conference game in week 2 that should be on the CBS Sports Network, but I digress. SMU is 11.5-point favorites with a game total of 48.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 30-19 in favor of SMU. We're doing the chalk Kevin Jennings thing again, aren't we? Because last week he was the Slate's most popular quarterback against Stanford for good reason. He was an absolutely smash on paper play against Stanford, and he came through 28.68 DraftKings points. Makes his third straight game of over 23 DraftKings points. At a salary of only $6,500, he can absolutely smash. Like, he's, to me, I think him and Jaywin Daniels are probably going to be my 2 most popular quarterbacks on the slate in terms of my ownership, because of the price tags they come in at and the upside they provide, because they are mobile, because they are playing on teams implied to score a lot of points. Like, I just can't stress enough how good of a play Jennings is at the quarterback position. At running back for SMU, we've talked about how they are the walking wounded right now. Rashad Smith is the one who is left. His workload's going down. Only 8 carries against Stanford. Stanford is a really stout run defense, though. They will do that to teams. Makes it 2 straight bad games for Rashad Smith, though. And I got to be honest, I don't know why he's still priced as the top running back on the slate. I would much rather play Giddens or Mullings, and Giddens and Mullings are cheaper. So I'm probably not going to get that much Rashad Smith this week. At the wide receiver spot, we do have some interesting situations here, because RJ Maryland, who has been the most productive receiver, who's actually their tight end, is out for the rest of the season. And SMU is a team that rotates guys so much from their skill positions. I don't really think I can get on here and like recommend one guy that's going to be the guy you can play to replace RJ Maryland. Like, I just don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to do it the Moneyball way, where, we're seeing where Brad Pitt, playing Billy Beane, he's talking to the, all the scouts, and he's like, we're not going to find one guy to replace Giambi. We're going to do it in the aggregate, right? I think that's kind of how they're going to do things. And I don't really feel that confident to play any of their wide receivers because of that, because I think that Maryland being out, they're going to split snaps at tight end. They already split snaps at receiver. You never know who's really going to go off for at receiver. The one guy I'm interested in that's listed as a receiver, though, is Roderick Daniels. He actually led them in rush attempts last week among running backs and wide receivers. He had 10 rushing attempts, got to 6.8 DraftKings points, because let's be honest, rush attempts are not as valuable as catches. The only downside is he did fumble twice. So he could be headed to the coach's doghouse because of that. So it's really hard to have a ton of confidence in him, but hey, he's only $3,100. If you're looking for a punt play, there's your punt play. He's going to play wide receiver, and he's going to play one running back here in this game. On the Duke side, Malik Murphy's their quarterback, former Texas guy. He wasn't bad at Texas, but what I'm beginning to realize is that when he played at Texas last year, he had a great offensive line, great skill players. The situation was pristine for him. It's not that way at Duke. He has to do a lot more on his own, doesn't have as much help, and it hasn't been great from a fantasy perspective. $6,800, I think he's way too expensive. I'd rather play Daniels or Jennings. At the running back spot, Jaquez Moore continues to be listed as questionable every single time, every single week it feels like, and it just leads to Star Thomas being a workhorse running back, and I think that this is a pretty good spot for him to be a workhorse running back. I don't mind him at $5,800 as long as Jaquez Moore continues to be out. At the running back spot, Jordan Moore, their number one receiver, is also questionable heading into the game. And it's some really weird quotes about this. Like, they're not really saying what it is, but they're just saying that he wants to be 100% heading into Saturday. I don't know what to make of it. I would lean to think that he plays. He's been kind of a dud each of the last 2 weeks, but he is their number one most targeted wide receiver on the season. Eli Panko is another guy who's been quite successful over the course of the season, but has not been great in recent weeks since they started ACC play. Samir Higgins is the other receiver who plays the most snaps. I would kind of keep it tight to just those 3 guys if I'm looking to play Duke wide receivers. All right, that's going to do it for this episode, y'all. Hopefully, we gave you guys all that you need to know to make some successful DFS lineups on DraftKings as well as FanDuel for this night slate. If this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. It really does help me out a ton when you guys do that. If you're listening on audio, you can rate and review. But that's going to do it for me here, guys. It's 11:40 at night now. Wow. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thank you guys for watching the list to this point. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel that you can be with us for next week college football content as well as our upcoming college basketball content as well. But thank you guys for watching the list to this point. Best of luck to you guys on the Saturday night slate, and I will see you guys next time.